Wireless networking is extremely common today. It's almost the default way that we connect laptops, smartphones, smart devices to different networks. So it's important to know how to set this up and actually secure these wireless networks. So we're going to jump into the hands-on portion of this lab. We're going to add a few devices here. Your typical home Wi-Fi router is actually a couple devices in one. It does routing because it can move packets between networks, like between your home network and the internet. It's also a wireless access point because it handles those wireless connections. It's also a switch because there's usually some physical cables that you can plug into that device. So they're really powerful devices all in one form factor. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to Packet Tracer and we are going to look at our network devices. We're going to go to the wireless devices and we're going to scroll over. I know the icons are real small here. Goodness gracious. Home router. We're going to add the home router. And I'll give it the label just to match. Call it the gateway. It's going to be our gateway to the internet if we actually, if Packet Tracer was actually connected to the broader internet. So it's on our network. That's good. We're good to go. We're going to click on the router to open its settings. Most network devices and Packet Tracer that you configure, they want you to, network devices at least, they want you to use a command line interface, but this router actually has a graphical user interface. If you were in your home network and you wanted to configure your Wi-Fi router, the interface would look something like this. They're all slightly different, but these same kind of options appear in virtually every interface. So I'm going to make sure I follow my instructions closely. So we'll just take note. The internet connection type, so we're not actually connected to the internet, but if we were, we would use the automatic configuration, meaning we're going to let our internet service provider give us an IP address. If we look at the network setup here, it says 192.168.0.1. That would be the IP address of our router. So that's good. This is very common. I accidentally just scrolled and changed that, so I'm going to change it back to 255.255.255.0. In here, we have the DHCP server. So this is for our internal private network. So somebody comes onto our network, they open up their laptop lid, they need an IP address. These are the settings that they are going to get. These are the IP addresses that our router is going to assign to the people inside our home. So DHCP is being used on both sides of the connection. Our router uses DHCP to get an IP address from the internet service provider, and internally our router uses DHCP to assign IP address to the different clients, the laptops, smartphones, all those devices inside our network. So it is enabled by default. That's good. We don't have to change any of that. We're just taking note. So all of this is fine. This is just the out-of-the-box, like factory settings for this particular router. So we're not going to change that. We're going to click the wireless link right next to setup. And we'll take a look at these settings. We have 2.4 gigahertz and we have 5 gigahertz settings. That's the frequency that this wireless access point is going to use. 2.4 gigahertz can go farther. That wavelength can penetrate brick walls. It can penetrate, doors, obstructions pretty well, so the signal can travel farther, but it has a lower theoretical speed. 5 gigahertz cannot penetrate walls as well. So the signal can go faster. You might get theoretically higher speeds, but if you have obstructions or going through walls, doors, your signal is going to be impeded quite a bit. So one's not necessarily better than the other. If you've got line of sight to your access point, sure, 5 gigahertz is going to be better. But if you've got one wireless access point to cover like the whole floor of your apartment or home, and that signal's got to go pretty far, then 2.4 gigahertz can actually give you better performance. The SSID, that's the name that people see when they connect to your network. So I'll change these SSIDs. I had my networking instructor, he told me to change the name to virus infected. So that if any of your neighbors wanted to connect to your Wi-Fi, they might not want to because it's infected with viruses. Doesn't matter what you name it. It's not really a security thing. All right, so I changed the SSID. Change it to whatever you want. Click Save Settings. This should be saved now. All right, so that's good. I'm going to go to the security, wireless security. So not security, but the wireless security. And let's take a look at the options. Right now, security is disabled. Well, that's not good. We don't want people spying on our packets. This is bad. So let's take a look at the options we have. We have WEP, the Wired Equivalency Protocol. This was the first attempt at encrypting Wi-Fi traffic. It was not good. It's bad. It's broken. Is there anything in here that tells you do not use this? Sadly, no, but it's really not secure. This is like a half step up from no encryption whatsoever. We have WPA, Wi-Fi Protected Access. That's good. And we have WPA version 2, which is much better. Then we have personal versus enterprise. One of the confusing things about this is that if you don't have any training in this, it's like, well, what the heck am I supposed to pick? Isn't enterprise better than personal? Like enterprises, they spend money on security, so why don't I choose enterprise? Well, if you choose enterprise, you have to have a directory server with user accounts and authentication, all that kind of stuff. For home networks, typically you're not using enterprise mode. WPA2 personal, that's where you enter in the password. This is what 99% of homes are going to use. You're going to use WPA2 personal. So I'm going to choose WPA2 personal for all of them. We've got to pick a passphrase for all of them. So I'm just going to call it my password. My password. So yeah, this is not super secure, but hey, we're just testing. So we got to scroll down. We got to make, did I just, I'm having issues with my trackpad. Scroll down, make sure you hit Save Settings. Otherwise, if you click somewhere else, those settings will be lost. All right, so this is good. Let's go grab a Wi-Fi client. So I'm going to close my router. And let's add a smartphone. Why a smartphone? Well, because the hardware here in Packet Tracer doesn't come with a Wi-Fi card by default. You have to add it. So we're just going to skip that. The smartphone actually comes with Wi-Fi capabilities. And even staring at my screen, goodness gracious, it is hard to find. There's the smartphone. So I'm going to drag that smartphone. I'll call it the iPhone 3.2. Little typo there on the iPhone. Okay, so we've got a phone. We want to connect our phone to the Wi-Fi network. So I'm going to click on that smartphone to configure it like we're going into the settings. I go to config. I want my wireless. And now what do we choose for authentication? What the heck? So we saw WEP before. We said we don't want WEP. We've got WPA and we've got WPA2. What's the difference between WPA and PSK? Well, PSK is the pre-shared key. That shared key is the password. Someone comes to your house like, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? That's the key. So I'm going to choose WPA2 PSK. Why don't they call it personal? I don't know. They just don't. My password. I've got the Wi-Fi password. And the SSID that I want to connect to. Virus infected. That's what I called it. It'd be nice if they gave us a list to select from, but they don't. All right, so are we good to go? Let's go to the desktop. Let's go to the command prompt. Let's test our connectivity. I see I've got a line there. So what's the IP address of my home router? Well, I'll run ipconfig. Do I have an IP address? I do have an IP address. It says my IP address is 192.168.0.101. So I didn't set that. When I told my phone to connect to the Wi-Fi, it automatically asked the router, hey, can I pretty please have an IP address? And the router responded, said, here you go, here's one, using that DHCP, the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So can I ping 192.168.0.1? Should be able to. Yeah, I get a reply. So my phone is able to communicate with the wireless router. So all of that's good. So we set up our Wi-Fi router. By default, it was insecure, so we had to go into the wireless security settings. We chose WPA2 with the pre-shared key, because that's the strongest level of security that we could get as home users because we don't have a central directory. If we had a central directory server with user accounts, we could have used the enterprise mode, but for 99.9% of us working on home networks, this is the way we're actually going to do it. So once we go into our smartphone and set the connection properties, we can connect just fine to that wireless access point. So it's really important to use modern Wi-Fi protection. Otherwise, hackers can sit outside your home or a place of business, sniff those packets, and actually break the encryption. So no encryption is the worst. WEP is pretty bad. WPA was a bridge to fix WEP. WPA2 is really good, commonly found. But coming down the line, WPA3 will become the default in a couple of years. Pretty much everything is going to be running WPA3. Packet Tracer just doesn't quite support it yet, but it's fine. I would be perfectly happy running WPA2 on my networks. I would not fear for the security of my wireless networks.